Good morning, and thank you for tuning in today for this live OREA TV news conference. I'm Tim Hudak. I'm CEO of the Ontario Real Estate Association. First, I want to bring greetings on behalf of our president, David Reed, and the OREA board. And I'm joined today by Nik Nanos, the founder, owner, head honcho of Nanos Polling. You know him as Nick on the numbers, most importantly. I think the most respected pollster in our country. Nick, I'm really pleased that you joined us today. And I thank the audience too, as we launch the Keep the Dream Alive advocacy campaign. This campaign is all about keeping home ownership affordable for millennials, first-time home buyers, and young families coming to Ontario. I bet you didn't know this, but in Ontario today, nearly half of the men and women between the ages of 25 to 34, I'm not talking teens, early 20s, 25 to 34, almost half are still living at home with their parents. And for the first time in 130 years, living at home with mom and dad is the most common living arrangement in our province. You have to go back to Laura Ingalls and Little House in the Prairie for when that was the reality. But on this particular issue, we can have the debate about who has it tougher, baby boomers or millennials. But it's really clear right now, it's a lot harder to get into home ownership than any previous generation. The good news is that great Canadian dream of home ownership continues to be very strong. And in a moment, Nik Nanos' research is going to show you exactly that. So I'm not going to get into the detailed results. That's Nik's job today. But I want to tell you about the sort of top 3 things that I'm pulling out of Nik Nanos' polling presentation. Number 1, despite what all the so-called experts and public commentators say, millennials are just as interested in home ownership as previous generations. Number 2, no surprise here, they're frustrated and they're struggling like never before to achieve the Canadian dream. And third, there are high levels of support among all Ontarians for political parties who commit to action on affordable home ownership in this upcoming campaign. Those 3 conclusions really underscore an uncomfortable truth here in the province of Ontario, that dream of home ownership is slipping away for an entire generation of young people. Look, you know the folks, right? They're in their 20s, their early 30s, they've done everything right. They got their degree, they're working hard, they're paying down their student debt, yet they're still struggling to take that next step in life to own a home. We need action to address this problem. And that is what our Keep the Dream Alive campaign is all about. Anchoring the campaign is a TV ad that follows a young couple in their journey to home ownership. The story will touch on the heartbreak that comes with doing all the right things but still not being able to afford a family home. It's an honest take on what thousands of people in Ontario go through every day. So here, take a look.
Okay, it's time for bed.
For thousands of young Ontarians, the dream of home ownership has never been harder to achieve. Ontario's 70,000 realtors want to help keep the dream alive. KeepTheDreamAlive.ca.
Very moving ad, eh?
Yeah.
So starting today, the Ontario Realtor campaign will run through the Ontario election on June the 7th and also into the fall and the October municipal elections. You will see that ad online, through social media, and on TV. At its heart, we want to encourage all Ontarians, millennials themselves, their baby boomer parents, anyone struggling to afford a home, to visit our campaign website. It's KeepTheDreamAlive.ca, and take action by contacting your local candidate and pressing them to do something. Folks, housing is not a luxury. People need a place to live. But to date, most government action has been around higher taxes or making mortgages more expensive or harder to get. Like, none of that is helping people get into the housing market in the first place. So it's time to take a very different path. Here are 3 ideas that will actually help keep the dream of homeownership alive instead of smothering it. Number 1, increase housing supply in Ontario. Number 2, increasing the supply of missing middle housing. That's like townhomes, semis, row townhouses, mid-rises in cities like Toronto. I mean, that's excellent for entry-level housing for millennials, but also really attractive for empty nesters, and then they free up the family home for a family starting out. And third, giving first-time home buyers some kind of relief, like increasing the first-time home buyer tax rebate to lower the land transfer tax, or to help with down payments in buying that first home. So more information and background on our policy ideas, you can see them at KeepTheDreamAlive.ca. So if you're a young person, you're a parent, you're a grandparent, you're watching this live press conference today, and you know someone who is struggling to achieve the Canadian dream, you know where to go. KeepTheDreamAlive.ca. Take action and push your politicians. And with that, I'd like now to invite Nik Nanos to walk us through the numbers. Nick.
Yeah, thanks, Tim. Let's drill into the numbers. You know, this was a very robust sample of 2,098 Ontarians. It's hot off the press. You know, the survey was just finished on April 22nd and includes a great subsample of millennials. It allows us to unpeel hopes, dreams, and aspirations, anxieties, and also the political traction of home ownership and what it might mean for the provincial election, which is going to be very interesting. So this is a very cool study, and it's great to share this with OREA and everyone out there that's listening.
And 2,000, so it's a huge sample, so you can really bear down on different voting types.
Exactly. You know, it's accurate, plus or minus 2.1 percentage points, 19 times out of 20. So it gives us a really great read on the pulse of the province when it comes to home ownership, the intersection, I'll say, of home ownership and politics, which everyone is now fixated on.
I kind of live in that spot. Good. All right, let's see it.
Exactly. So, you know, realistically, you know, you were talking about people's living situation, and you can see, you know, when we look at all Ontarians, non-millennials and millennials, that millennials are an outlier in terms of them living at home, you know, compared to everyone else. It speaks to kind of the situation. So think of the frame, right? So if you're an average millennial, you're more likely to be living at home. You're probably wondering, did I want to live at home? But you know, the reality is that's kind of the situation that you're in terms of your living arrangement. You know, but when we kind of connect that to views on home ownership, the numbers that really pop is that you can see that not just Ontarians, but millennials overwhelmingly believe that home ownership is a smart financial investment.
So the bars are the general pop, and then you've got the millennial read on the side, right?
Yeah, exactly. So you can see, you know, 90.8% of millennials agree or somewhat agree in terms of home ownership being a smart financial investment.
Yeah.
But you know, the killer number is the one at the bottom. Maybe it's a bit counterintuitive because we always think of millennials not wanting a car, the sharing economy and all that stuff. You know, we tested on home ownership. It's old-fashioned. Well, you know, people disagree with that. And you know, only 17%, 1 out of every 6 millennials actually agree that home ownership is an old-fashioned concept. They want to get in, they want to buy in, and they want to be part of that kind of home ownership.
Yeah, that's reassuring because you see that debate, oh, millennials, they don't want to own a home, they're going to rent forever, that kind of stuff. This shows that's a bunch of nonsense. They want to own a home just like previous generations.
Absolutely. You know, it speaks that there's also political traction when you look at this. You know, government's needing to do more. You can see that 3 out of every 4 Ontarians, almost 4 out of every 5 millennials want to see the government do more to create conditions, right, to help young people own a home. It's not about handouts. It's just create an environment where home ownership is accessible and achievable for millennials. And that's kind of the big political message, at least when we look at this. But this is the killer, affordability, right? So think of, you know, you can see, we asked about home ownership, whether it's affordable, unaffordable in the neighborhood, and you can see that 6 out of every 10 Ontarians say that it's unaffordable neighborhood to a certain extent, and it goes to 7 out of every 10 millennials. So this is kind of like the picture that we're starting to get. Think of more millennials compared to past generations living at home. Think of them knowing that it's a good investment, thinking of them looking at wanting to see the government create conditions, and then they're in their neighborhood and they're thinking, man, I don't know if I can afford to live in the same neighborhood as my parents. And that being kind of the anxiety that kind of overlays all of this. And you know, the barriers you can see, we look at kind of, and this is an open-ended question where people can kind of, they can kind of rank things. But you know, you can see that for millennials, the number one response is just saving enough money, but the second one is a little higher than non-millennials, personal debt. So these are kids, young men and women who are work hard, they go to school, they graduate from college or university, and they're struggling to have their first down payment, and they're kind of trying to manage personal debt. And kind of adds to just another level of complexity to how difficult it is for millennials right now. And you know, this is where politicians, you should be paying attention to these numbers right now. Likelihood to vote for a party who is committed to helping young people own a home. This is a political winner. You know, you can see that 2 out of every 3 Ontarians would agree, or some would agree, that they would vote for a political party that helped young people. 7 out of every 10 millennials. You know, you can basically see that this is on the radar. And you know what, Tim? A lot of times we should delineate between what's important and what people might take an interest in.
Yeah.
You know, people take an interest in, you know, what a politician might say, a controversy, you know, what might happen in the press gallery. Stuff like jobs, home ownership, healthcare means something to people. They're close to their day-to-day lives. It's what they're thinking about. And what this points to is people probably want to hear about home ownership and how that's going to work and how we're going to help young people.
So that's a high number, right? I mean, you and I have done polling together since '97, I think. We were teenagers at the time.
Yeah.
But you've seen a lot of numbers come and go. So that tells you that this is like a high level of concern that will drive votes, or just something people think is important but is not a vote driver?
Oh, I think it is a vote driver because it's very practical and very immediate. So think of young people wanting to kind of have a chance. And you know, I think when people look at politicians, they look at the promises that they make and they say, what does this mean to me? Does this help me get a job? You know, does this help me own a home? The other thing for millennials that we know from a lot of our other polling is because they're healthy, healthcare usually isn't as important attraction. But you know, things like, you know, jobs and I would say home ownership do quite well among millennials. And you know, let's talk about taxes for a second. You know, we tested on level of support for municipal land transfer tax. And not to get overly technical, red is bad, green is good in this. And
not
you can
much
see,
green, not much
green
good.
here.
Well, it's punishing, right? I mean, the municipal land transfer tax is basically when you buy a home, you've got to pay this out before you get the keys. And it's doubly as bad in Toronto, because I think Toronto is unique in Canada, where there's an additional land transfer tax if you're trying to buy a home.
Yeah, you know what I found really interesting about this, Tim, is that the numbers among millennials are generally similar to everyone else, and that there are not a lot of undecided. What does this mean? So think of it this way: living at home, in debt, not sure if they can afford to live in the neighborhood that their family lives in, and then they're like, oh yeah, there's this other thing. It's called the municipal land transfer tax. There's another hurdle for me to kind of get over. And I was surprised at the number of millennials that had a formed opinion on this. It means that as they're trying to figure out the future for them so that they can make that investment, what they believe is a great financial investment, that this is something that's on the radar as something that they're worried about.
And a high level of awareness too, right? So they've not paid that in the past, but they don't own a home, but they're still very aware and very concerned about it.
Yeah. So you can see about concerns out there. You know, this is kind of like, I'll call this the political buffet of concerns. But you can see healthcare, hydro prices, the environment, jobs in the economy, housing affordability, property taxes. These are the things that are more likely to kind of drive concerns. But you know, look at those millennial numbers. Just as many, factoring the margin of error for millennials, just as many millennials are concerned about the environment, which is an important issue, as housing affordability. You know, that might be counterintuitive for a lot of people. They might think that they're into all these progressive things, but it's like they have these environmental aspirations.
Sure.
Owning a home, another aspiration that millennials want to key into.
What pops off the screen, that's an excellent point. And look at hydro, because you would think if you did a general poll, hydro prices would be the top issue or maybe number 2.
Yeah.
But home ownership on your numbers for the millennial set
yeah.
is actually a higher level of concern than hydro prices for that generation.
Yeah, exactly. Well, hey, if you can't own the home, let's worry about hydro prices once you get a home, Tim. Like, let's be realistic, right? So it shouldn't be a surprise, but I thought it was kind of interesting. Environment and housing affordability, top drivers and concerns for millennials. And this goes further down. We'll go further down the food chain. Not saying these things aren't important, but not as much of a hot button. Schools for children, traffic congestion, except if you're in Toronto, of course.
Right.
Public transit, municipal services, not as much of a hot button issue as the other ones that we talked about in terms of kind of the environment for millennials, the environment and housing affordability. Impact of potential commitments on a provincial election vote. So you can see we kind of trial run some promises and see whether people would be more likely, less likely, or as likely to vote for any party. So this wasn't directed at anyone. And you can see, I always look at the difference between those that would be more likely and less likely as a bit of the trade-off.
Okay.
So say, for example, a promise to help homeowners improve their energy efficiency, 62% say more likely, 12% less likely. That's a net gain of 50 points for a party that wants to engage on that. And even a province to exempt first-time home buyers from paying the land transfer tax tracks quite well, as does a promise to commit to better transit in the community. But you can see among millennials, remember we talked about the environment and home ownership? This energy efficiency thing is the intersection of those two things. Millennials not only want to own a home, but they'd like to have conditions where if they own a home, they can make it as energy efficient as possible, because the environment is just as important to them as home ownership. Okay. So I thought that was kind of cool. It speaks to the level of practicality and pragmatism that a lot of millennials have. So
the beauty contest.
Yes. Well, I was going to call it the juicy bits. The beauty contest. Like, anyways. So if an election were held now,
yeah,
we're looking at the Progressive Conservatives winning 42% support. The Liberals at 31, NDP 21, Green Party at 5. You can see the advantage for the Conservatives much wider among non-millennials than millennials, only an 8-point spread. And to put this into context, you might think that an 8 or an 11-point spread is big. That's not a big spread. If 1 out of 20 people move out of the Progressive Conservative column into the Liberal column, then we go from kind of a definite slam dunk for Doug Ford to a horse race between
1 out of 20.
Yeah, 1 out of 20, because that's only 5%, right? The Tories go down 5, Liberals go up 5, and whammo, you've got a horse race. So, and it's even tighter among millennials. I would hazard to say, maybe this is one of the key things that we've learned from this study. Not just home ownership, but millennials. They'll put those two things together. And for any party, that's got to be the sweet spot, because millennials are going to be future voters. As they get older, they will be voting more, they'll be more engaged. This is where you should be investing.
So a couple things. So these numbers are closer than other polls that we've seen in the media. You said fresh numbers that just finished
on April 22nd, yeah.
Perfect, so very fresh numbers. Undecided, 22%. So the election campaign has not started officially. It's begun unofficially. Yep. 22%, high number?
That's a high number for where we are, but what we would expect is that the number will drop. Voting is a lot like Christmas shopping, assuming you shop at Christmas time.
Last minute, last every year.
Well, no, that's what I said. There are people that decide in advance, people that wait during the election and the debates. There are people that wait till the last weekend, and then I guess with you, you're a last minute shopper. So people that wait till the last day to make a final decision. But this number will drop, and it's going to be interesting to see whether it breaks in favor of one party compared to another. But the key takeaway here is that the race is closer among millennials. They're hot on home ownership. They're hot on the environment. They want to see the conditions for them to have a chance, not to be given anything, just to have a chance to be a homeowner. And you can see accessible voters. This is kind of, if we can geek out for a second. So we asked Ontarians whether they would consider or not consider voting for each of the provincial parties.
Yep.
This 50% number for the Progressive Conservatives is actually high. This is very good. It speaks that the proportion of Ontarians that will consider voting Conservative, even if they don't vote, is pretty good. You can see that the accessible voter pool for the provincial Liberals and the NDP are lower. But the thing is that there's a lot of cross-pollination between the NDP and Liberal numbers in terms of those people that would consider voting for either one of those parties. That's what Ford's got to watch out for. He needs the opposition divided. A divided opposition is critical to his victory. If people start massing, or if there's a herding effect in favor of either the Liberals and the New Democrats, watch out, it could get even closer. Now, Tim, this is the beauty contest number, right?
All right, there we go. Juicy bits, beauty contest.
Exactly. So, preferred premier, you can see, interesting, 10% nobody, 18% unsure. So just think, almost 3 out of every 10 don't like anything on the political menu right now. But when you kind of parse out everyone else, you can see that Doug Ford does well at 32%, followed by Andrea Horwath, New Democrat leader, second at 21%. And Kathleen Wynne at 17%. So, and you know, you can see millennials a little more unsure, right? So just think, they're looking at leaders. They're looking for signals on what those leaders have promised and how they'll create those conditions for jobs and home ownership and the environment and stuff like that. And they're up, I would say millennials are up for grabs.
Yeah, big gap. I mean, almost a quarter of millennials have no preference right now, according to your numbers.
Exactly.
Of leader.
Yeah, so, so you know, the key takeaway is, yes, the Conservatives have the advantage, but they shouldn't be too confident in where they are.
Okay.
Millennials are an opportunity. Home ownership can be a key trigger to activate and engage millennials, whether you're a progressive conservative strategist, a liberal strategist, or a New Democrat strategist.
Got it.
I think that's it. Oh, conclusions.
Yeah, what's
Sorry.
it all about? Nick on the numbers.
Okay, so anyways, the key thing, home ownership, a smart financial investment, and the millennials want to get into that. They're living at home, but they find their neighborhood that their parents live in and where they're living at home is unaffordable, so there's a significant amount of anxiety. They would look positively on any politician that stood up and said, hey, you know what? You should be able to aspire, you should have the ambition to own a home, and here's the environment that they would support, the government policy environment to support to have that happen. And Tories are ahead, but shouldn't be too cocky.
Okay, so a lot of millennial vote up for grab. And secondly, home ownership is a driving issue. That's a compelling issue. Yeah. So, I mean, is that a key to unlocking the vote count in the greater Golden Horseshoe area, the vote-rich part of our province?
Oh, for sure. It's actually not only key now, I would say it's a key long-term strategy. Going forward, I don't think any party can win without doing well among millennials. So think of this as a smart political investment, connecting home ownership, the environment and energy efficiency, and kind of political traction on that front.
There you go. And I imagine the boomer parents too. Well, listen, thank you, Nick, for walking through the numbers and some really interesting results. Again, this will be available online as well. I want to now go to any questions that we may have coming in. Jamie Hoffing, our head of media relations, on the ball here.
Tim, why specifically target millennials during this for this campaign, for this specific campaign?
So so I don't know if everybody could hear that. The question that came in was why specifically target millennials. I'll give my answer and then Nick on the actual analysis. The campaign isn't simply for millennials, but I think cross generations, people are now actually living the millennial trap, where they did everything they're supposed to. They grew up told, get a good job, get your education, pay down your debt, and then get a home, but they're trapped because they can't get that entry level on the ladder. And we're seeing that right across the province. So we do hope that KeepTheDreamAlive.ca will be a place for millennials, their boomer parents, grandparents. I think a lot of people are going to key in.
Oh, absolutely. You know, the thing is, it's a bit of a 2-for-1. So think of millennials, you know, our research shows that the older that you are, the more likely you are to vote. So think of millennials at the beginning of their democratic journey and just starting to become politically engaged. And that's why it's critically important for parties to engage in policies that can connect with millennials. So that's the one. The 2-for-1 is, you know what? Everyone's got, you know, all these millennials have parents, right? And their parents,
how they got here.
No, but not only are millennials worried, you know, I would hazard to say that the parents of millennials are worried because they're thinking, you know, can my son or daughter have the same vacation that we had? Can my son or daughter afford to live in our home if they want to buy our home or afford to live in our neighborhood?
Yep.
And they have that same type of anxiety. So think of it as a political 2-for-1 where you get this very critical voting segment and then the people, their loved ones, who are already very likely to vote. So it's a 2-for-1 politically.
Well said. Mr. Hoffing, another question.
For Nick, how engaged are millennials in this upcoming provincial election and even in municipal elections?
So now, millennials are not as engaged as, are we old folks? Maybe.
Come on,
No,
don't
well,
say that.
we're the
quite
wrong
yet.
kind of people to compare to. Anyways, they're, you know, as I said, millennials are kind of at the beginning of their democratic journey, so they tend to vote a little less. But do you know why they don't vote? They don't vote because they don't see things that are relevant to their day-to-day lives. You know, and I find that there's a direct connection between politicians speaking about issues that affect people's day-to-day lives and them most likely to vote. So maybe there's a broader democratic kind of bump in this, is that talking about home ownership might actually increase millennials' likelihood to vote. It might not drive them in a particular direction, but they might say, hey, do you know what? There's a politician in a party that has a policy that means that I might have a better chance to own a home. I'm going to come out and vote and engage for that local candidate or support that provincial party. So, you know, so we have to talk about things that they care about. They care about home ownership.
And basically, because it's the first time they're voting or early in their democratic journey, as you said, they're kind of open to all three parties, far more so than any other generation.
Yeah, exactly. You know, the level of undecided is higher, and they want action. You know, the thing is a lot of these millennials are kind of activist citizens, right? Which means that they kind of share their anxiety, they're on social media, they want to hear from politicians, and you know, the worst thing that any politician or party can do is to ignore millennials and kind of stick to the old playbook of, you know, focusing on kind of issues that don't resonate with this group of voters.
Well said. All right, well, let's wrap this up, folks. Thank you for tuning in today. If you've not already done so, KeepTheDreamAlive.ca. Go to the campaign website, and please do share the ad on social media. Our hashtag, HomeOwnershipDream. Again, HomeOwnershipDream is a hashtag. So follow our association on Twitter, OREA Info, and please feel free to contact us with any questions that you have. Again, I want to thank Nik Nanos for the outstanding presentation, an in-depth dive into the numbers, and for being here today. You can find the entire results of the Nanos poll at KeepTheDreamAlive.ca. I want to thank our technical crew today, all of the OREA team for putting this on. Of course, I want to thank you very much for taking the time to tune in. One last chance, KeepTheDreamAlive.ca. Help us keep the dream of home ownership within reach for all Ontarians. Thanks very much, and now have a great day.
Okay, it's time for bed.
For thousands of young Ontarians, the dream of home ownership has never been harder to achieve. Ontario's 70,000 realtors want to help keep the dream alive. KeepTheDreamAlive.ca